Well, good morning, everyone. And I appreciate each one of you being here today. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous day. Today you can wake up with a chill in the air, which reminds you of fall on this late summer day. And the dew is thick on the grass. Cloudless sky. So we've been talking about the Eightfold Path, which not so much a path as we described it as a circle or a gyre or a spiral or a circle of practice for life, more than a path from A to B. But the last portion of the Eightfold Path is the last three elements are termed often mental development: right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And we talked about right effort last time. Well, the traditional way, at least in the Theravadan tradition, of talking about right mindfulness is to refer to the four foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of body, mindfulness of the feeling, mindfulness of mind or consciousness, and mindfulness of Dhamma. And then in talking about right concentration, there is discussion of the jhanas, the four states of mental absorption, which the Buddha recommended. But in the Soto Zen tradition, usually those teachings are not prominent or completely absent. We went to a 10-day retreat, Carol and I, in LaSalle, Illinois, a few years back. It was a beautiful location. There were quite a few participants, and I did appreciate the retreat greatly. It was about the jhanas, about these levels of absorption, these types of absorption that the Buddha recommended. And there were expert speakers there. But I must say, I spent a good portion of the time trying to discern whether I was experiencing piti or not. Piti, P-I-T-I, the Pali word usually translated as joy or rapture, because that's the focus of absorption, of the focus of absorption of the first jhana. So I must say I didn't feel like I really understood what was going on. There are many different forms of Buddhism that have arisen as Buddhism has passed through various cultures, including our culture. And there are different emphases on various practices, which I think suit certain temperaments. Some people are just temperamentally or experientially drawn to one or another of the forms of Buddhist practice, whether it be Theravadan, Zen Buddhism, Rinzai Zen, Soto Zen, Tibetan, Pure Land Buddhism. So I think it's wonderful that there are these different ways of practice that have evolved over the centuries to accommodate the needs of different kinds of people. I find that I tend to respond more to the riddle, the story, the image, the metaphor, than to lists of concepts. In the 13th century in Japan, there was a movement toward, in a way, simplification of practice, in part to make it more approachable for lay people. And Dogen, Eihei Dogen, considered the founder of the Japanese Soto Zen tradition, was in a way part of that simplification movement. And he focused on Zazen. Other teachers around the same time, Buddhist teachers, for instance, Honen, Shinran, focused on Nembutsu, just giving trust in Amitabha Buddha, a stand-in for all Buddhas, a stand-in for the Buddha way. By reciting Nembutsu repeatedly. So in the Soto Zen tradition, as I mentioned, Dogen emphasized Zazen, sitting meditation, most literally sitting meditation. Another term, shikantaza, just sitting, is used more or less equivalently. So for Dogen, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration collapsed into one, Zazen. So then we need to explore, well, what does he mean by Zazen? What is Zazen? Well, it's difficult to explain, and there's so many attempts. Essentially, I think it's impossible to explain to someone who hasn't tried it, to someone who hasn't had at least some experience with making an effort to sit, to just sit. Trying to explain it to, for instance, a class full of students who have no familiarity with sitting practice would be, in a way, trying to explain how to ride a bicycle, or trying to explain what ice cream is like when you eat it. Well, it's cold, it's sweet, It's creamy. It's kind of sticky on your lips. Doesn't really capture the experience of eating ice cream. So Dogen made an effort to describe what Zazen was about. There's a short essay of his called the Fukan Zazenji, where he describes the practice of Zazen. And I'll pull up a passage from that Fukan Zazenji, where he says, "You should therefore cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns the light inward to illuminate yourself. Body and mind of themselves will drop away, and your original face will be manifest. If you want to attain suchness, you should practice suchness without delay." And near the end of the Fukan Zazenji, he says, "Sit solidly in absorption and think, not thinking." How do you think not thinking? Non-thinking. This is the art of Zazen. Zazen is not learning to do concentration. It is the Dharma gate of great ease and joy. It is undefiled practice enlightenment. So that that final passage referred to a story, a Zen story, which all of his students would have been familiar with. And it's about Yoshan. Yoshan was a Zen teacher in the 9th century in China. And Yoshan emphasized sitting meditation practice, and one of his students came up to him after a sitting and said, "Master, what do you think about while you're sitting there like a mountain?" And Yoshan said, "I think about not thinking." And the student said, well, how do you think about not thinking? And Yoshan replied, "Non-thinking." So it wasn't about the usual discursive mind where we tend to get involved in our thoughts, wrapped up in our thoughts, sometimes very emotionally engaged in our thoughts. And it also wasn't about eliminating all thought, trying to suppress it, make it go away, have a completely quiet mind. But it was something different. It's a different mental state. Not so much about focusing attention, but expanding attention. Realizing that universe of awareness, that limitless universe of awareness that includes our thoughts, but is not confined to our thoughts. Oftentimes, images of sky or ocean are used. Big sky mind, or throwing yourself into the ocean of Buddha. There are other more contemporary descriptions of Zazen, and I stumbled upon one that struck me. And this is a quotation taken from Yasutani Roshi, who was a Japanese teacher teaching in Los Angeles for a time. And he said, Zazen is like sitting in the center of a clearing in the forest, knowing that ultimate danger is about to strike, but not knowing what form it will take or from what direction it will come. It's like sitting in the center of a clearing in a forest, knowing ultimate danger is about to strike, but not knowing from where it will come or what form it will take. So I would just add to that, I think, because it sounds like kind of a fearful image. I would just add to that in addition, there is a faith that things will be okay. You may have seen many of these signs around the neighborhood. Things will be okay. They cropped up after COVID. Things will be okay. A certain faith or a trust in the practice that even though you don't know what form it will take or what direction it will come from, the practice will support you. You'll be okay. A few years back, I was invited to give a talk on Zen Buddhism or Soto Zen Buddhism at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis. They had an exhibit related to Buddhist art, and they had speakers from various traditions, and they had breakout groups for each of the traditions. So there was a room designated for a discussion of Zen Buddhism. So I arrived there ahead of time, and I had a cushion set up at elevation so that I could see the people out there and talk. But I wanted to demonstrate the posture of Zazen while I was talking. I was told that there would be a moderator who would come and introduce me. So I got set up and had everything in place. Felt like I was ready. And then I just started sitting. Just sitting. And the time came for the meeting to start, and people had assembled or were assembling into the room. A few people coming late. And interestingly, everyone who entered the room became silent shortly after entering. Perhaps they saw me up there at the front and realized there was something that shouldn't be disturbed. And so they were coming in silently and just sitting in their chairs. Well, the time came for the moderator to appear to introduce me, and she didn't. I had a little time clock I was watching, and time passed, and I was sitting there waiting. And everyone in the audience was sitting there just waiting, not knowing. And I wondered if they might be thinking, well, is this some sort of performance art? Is it kind of like John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, where the musicians are instructed not to play anything? But there was a peace in the room during that interval. And finally, the moderator did appear after about 5 minutes. And the talk went on. But it occurred to me that everyone in the room was practicing Zazen during that time, was sitting still, silent, not knowing what was happening. With a certain level of trust that this was okay. So I think I'll conclude at that point. And we'll be concluding at least this pass at a discussion of the Eightfold Path, which is such a rich teaching that if we're still here in the future, that we can talk about it again and again. So thank you very much for listening. And if there are any comments or suggestions or any thoughts you have, I would love to hear them.